just about every location we've been to, we've heard about the difficulties people have with obtaining services when they live in remote areas.
Tonight, concluding thoughts on 4 days of hearings in Montreal.
I don't think prison helped me, but it really did open my eyes to just how flawed the justice system is.
A Blackfoot man has achieved a new level of awareness in the camp he started in solidarity for Tina Fontaine.
The agreement has really made a great divide within the Sixties Scoop community.
And the proposed settlement for the 60s Scoop is not yet a done deal. Good evening, welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward. The National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls wrapped up 5 days of hearings in Montreal today. Anishinaabe members from the Abitibi-Wini First Nation came forward to share their story. Maurice Kistebish's mother, Kathleen Rubin Kistebish, died in 1967 at the age of 43. At the time, it was believed that she had drowned in the Harricana River, but she was murdered, her head crushed and thrown into the water. That was a family secret that Kathleen's sister Beatrice revealed after 50 years of silence.
They said that they would investigate to see what really happened. So my parents were asked. My parents said no. We'll just leave it like that. My mom said that her life was gone. We'll just leave it like that. It was too painful for them. So this was something that I always kept to myself and I never told anyone.
After 4 days of hearings in Montreal, the National Inquiry commissioners met with media on Friday. They were witness to about 70 testimonies. They spoke about what stood out and what's to come. Tom Fenario was there.
One aspect of this week's testimonies that struck the commissioners was the lack of services for Indigenous peoples in Quebec's northern regions.
We've also heard a lot about the medical profession and how medical services are provided in remote communities, the reality that a lot of people have to fly out, and the impact that has on those that have to leave their communities and those left behind. We've also heard about a number of disappearances related specifically to the medical facilities.
Chief Commissioner Marion Buller says they will subpoena health authorities for the documents pertaining to the cases that they've heard.
In just about every location we've been to, we've heard about the difficulties people have with obtaining services when they live in remote areas. Medical services, education, housing, things that are just basic things that we all take for granted.
Commissioners were also asked whether the inquiry intends to return to Quebec, specifically to better serve the Algonquin, Inuit, and Cree territories in the northwestern part of the province.
It is a challenge that we won't be able to get to Nunavik in northern Quebec and to the James Bay Cree territory as well. And this is why we're looking and asking for more time to get to those remote areas. It would have been ideal for us to be in Nunavik to hear not only from those that have registered, but as you know, when we come to a territory, a lot of people, as they see the process, come forward and want to share.
We'll have to see how long if we are granted the extension, how long it is. It's premature at this point to say anything specific about where we'll go, and it's premature to make commitments about locations
Buller
as
adds
well.
They don't know when they'll hear back from the government regarding the extension.
If we don't get the extension, we'll complete our work as best we can, but it will be superficial. There won't be the depth or the breadth that we think this work requires.
The next inquiry public hearings will be held in Thompson, Manitoba on March 20th and 21st. Tom Fenario, APTN National News, Montreal.
In late February, following rallies for Tina Fontaine, protest camps popped up in cities across the country. But many of those are now gone. The Soaring Eagle camp in Calgary was taken down almost 2 weeks ago. But that camp is now back, and it has a new purpose. Because for one organizer, it's become a journey of healing. Tamara Pimentel has the story.
It's been almost 1 week. Garrett Smith has been waking up in this tent in the middle of downtown Calgary. The idea of camping outside the courthouse was a response to injustices Indigenous people have recently faced. But little did Smith know that staying here would become a healing journey.
I never really knew exactly who I was, and the missing link that I've realized is I just need to get in touch with my culture. I need to get in touch with Nitsitipi and who we are as real people, who we are as Blackfoot, you know, and that's really what this journey is.
The Soaring Eagle camp came up as part of a movement of solidarity. When it was taken down almost 2 weeks ago, people felt a sense of loss.
Immediately when we left, I was just inundated with messages about where's the camp, where's the camp, where's the camp.
Smith says the community needed the camp, and so did he, so a new camp was raised, Mohkinsis, the Blackfoot name for Calgary. It gave Smith the courage to share stories of his past, violent acts, crimes he's committed, including an armed robbery in 2006 that put him behind bars.
There's a level of guilt that we as Indigenous men, I believe, inherent in us. It's passed down. It's a blood memory that we've had from everything that we've endured.
Smith is Blackfoot from southern Alberta. He left home almost a decade ago to escape trauma and racism. He moved to Toronto, where he became an actor. Now he has time off from his career, returned home, and took part in this discussion about the justice system he says has failed too many.
I don't think prison helped me, but it really did open my eyes to just how flawed the justice system is, and how all these colonial structures, how all these settler workshops, you know, that are designed from a settler perspective, you know, to help heal our people, these AA meetings, these NA organizations, you know, they don't address the needs that we as Indigenous people need.
What Indigenous people need, Smith says, is community gatherings and ceremonies, something he says the people of Calgary will have access to for as long as Mohkinsis stands.
That's one of the amazing things that I've been experiencing, is just exposing myself in this way and telling my truth, that, you know, that yes, I've made mistakes. Yes, I've been violent. You know, yes, I'm guilty of lateral violence. I'm guilty of abuse towards our own people, towards our own women, you know, towards my own family, you know, towards my own mom even at times, you know. Like, these are all things that I've had to look in the mirror and acknowledge.
Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News, Calgary.
And we would like to hear what you have to say about this or any other story. Here's how to contact us. Send an email to news@aptn.ca, like our APTN National News Facebook page. Follow us on Twitter @APTN News, or go to our website, aptnnews.ca. Since 2000, there have been 35 homicide investigations in the Yukon. 12 are still unsolved. But one family is hopeful they will soon have justice in the killing of their father, as the Yukon RCMP just created a new cold case unit. Shirley McLean has more.
The family bond that ties the Waugh siblings together is tight. For 4 years, they have been fighting for justice since their father, Alan Waugh, was found dead in his Whitehorse home on the Kwalendon First Nation.
My dad was taken from us in May of 2014 in the community, and we don't really have any answers about what happened, so we're still waiting.
Today, they remember better times.
It's been a long time since we looked at these photos.
The RCMP won't tell the family how the 69-year-old man died. They say they need to protect the integrity of their father's case, but they did rule his death as a homicide. And the unknown weighs heavy on their hearts and minds.
Unfortunately, your mind can be pretty cruel to you. You'll sit there and think about imagining what could have happened. I have several different scenarios in my mind.
There have been a rash of killings in the territory since Waugh's murder 4 years ago. Last year alone, 8 people were murdered in the Yukon, including 3 tied to the Kwalendon First Nation. Those 3 murders remain unsolved. And there are older cases as well, including Wendy Carlick's daughter, Angel, whose body was found 10 years earlier.
It's been very difficult. Every time that there's a new murder announced, we go through those same emotions all over again.
Yukon government announced earlier this month they will be funding the RCMP for 3 years to set up a new 3-person investigative unit to focus on these cold cases.
So we're really hopeful that with this new money that has been announced and new positions, that more energy will be brought back into older cases.
I imagine there's got to be some people out there that know.
Shirley McLean, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
Father of a missing Montreal boy is renewing an appeal for help from the public after new surveillance footage has emerged of his son. The video released last night was taken shortly before 10-year-old Ariel Kuaku disappeared Monday. It shows him turning around twice as if being called by someone out of sight. This happened near the friend's house where he was supposed to be headed. His father sees it as proof he may have been abducted. The little boy has not been seen for more than 4 days. 60s Scoop rallies were held across the country today. More on those coming up after the break.
Here's a look at Saturday's weather forecast starting on the East Coast. Cloudy and 3 above in Charlottetown and St. John's. Overcast and +2 in Happy Valley Goose Bay, Cartwright and Kuchewak, where snow is on the way. +1 in Sept-Île, a chilly 12 below in Chibougamau. Sunny across southern Ontario, -4 in Ottawa and Sault Ste. Marie. +4 under the sun in Sudbury, Wawa and Kapuskasing. Cold day in Churchill, -22. 0 in Flin Flon and the Pas. +1 in Barons River and Gimli Harbour. -1 in Winnipeg and Brandon. In Saskatchewan, +1 in Swift Current, Saskatoon and Yorkton. 0 on Saturday in Meadow Lake and La Ronge.
Welcome back. About 36 people stood in a cold wind on Parliament Hill to rally for 60 Scoop survivors. It was sponsored by the National Indigenous Survivors of Child Welfare Network. And when the event was first announced several weeks ago, it was to oppose the $800 million settlement proposal. But as APTN's Todd Lamoran reports, the network very recently reversed its stance.
She goes, "This is Canada. This can't happen in Canada."
Thousands of Aboriginal people were adopted into non-Indigenous families. They wore purple armbands, a healing color in some Indigenous cultures, according to organizers. And healing was something some speakers emphasized.
There were Sundance lodges where they thought of the children that were taken away. I know this. My elders back home, like my uncle Mervyn Drever, my auntie Lorraine, people like that told me that they prayed for us kids that were taken away. So never forget those prayers.
But hanging over the gathering was the $800 million settlement proposed by the federal government. At past press conferences, the network announced its opposition to it, a position not everyone agreed with.
The agreement has really made a great divide within the 60s Scoop community, and we're looking at this as a way of bringing everybody back together again.
Marcia Brown spearheaded the agreement out of her class action suit in Ontario. The federal government was willing to settle with her, but Brown would not sign off unless there was a deal for all status First Nations adoptees across Canada. For Colleen Cardinal, this was key to changing her mind.
And then finding out that Marcia did not have to share her settlement, that she could have just settled in Ontario with the 22 First Nations. So finding that out and then realizing that she's actually sharing her settlement with us.
Another concern for Cardinal was that anyone who spent any amount of time in foster care could be party to the settlement. Not true.
Because it's only you had to be deemed a permanent ward or adopted into a non-Indigenous home, that makes a huge difference.
Although the network will not oppose the deal, they say it's far from perfect.
There's still, for me personally, there's still some disappointments because as a Métis person, I sort of envisioned that the announcement would have been made for everybody.
The federal government has reached out to the Métis National Council for a possible negotiation. In addition to Parliament Hill, rallies were held at high noon at 8 other cities across Canada. Todd Lamoran, APTN National News, Ottawa.
One of those cities was Winnipeg, where a small group of Manitoba adoptees and survivors gathered to call on support to oppose the proposed $800 million settlement. The group has until April 30th to produce 2,000 signatures to oppose the deal. They plan on traveling across Canada to gain support. Brittany Hobson brings us more.
We as adoptees deserve more, and we are fighting this right to the bitter end.
That's the message Colleen Rajat brought to this gathering in Winnipeg. The 60s Scoop adoptee is part of a Manitoba group opposing the proposed $800 million settlement the federal government announced last fall.
We have 6 weeks to get to the 2,000 signature mark, and then we are going to oppose this agreement, and we're going to court in May to tell the government of Canada that this agreement is not fair, it's not just, there is no widespread consultation, and most importantly, we do not want to see lawyers getting rich on the backs of our pain and suffering.
Stuart Garnett is a lead plaintiff for the Manitoba-based class action lawsuit. He says the federal government never consulted with any groups in this province.
Manitoba, being the epicenter for the 60s Scoop, deserves a chance for all the voices that were adopted out and to be heard for the case.
Garnett was one of the adoptees on stage with Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Carolyn Bennett during the October 5th settlement announcement. He says at the time he knew little about the details outlined in the agreement.
Once we started reading the proposed settlement, a lot of red flags started coming up, and we broke it down and decided to make a maneuver and try to get a second look at the case.
APTN received a copy of the proposed settlement. Survivors could see anywhere between $25,000 to $50,000 each, while lawyers are seeing $75 million. Another concern the group has is lead plaintiffs could receive an additional $10,000 to $20,000. Garnett and Rajat hope to see a restructuring of the payment model, one that would be similar to the model used for residential school survivors.
And what we really want to see and what we're asking for is that we're treated in the same way as residential school survivors, that we are able to appear before an adjudicator, and an adjudicator will decide what level of compensation everyone would get. And it should be on an individual basis because everyone's story is different.
The group will continue collecting signatures from supporters over the next 6 weeks. Brittany Hobson, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
In Whitehorse, a rally was held at the Healing Totem Pole for Yukon survivors over the lunch hour today. A small group of 60s Scoop survivors banded together in protest of the proposed $800 million settlement being offered by Ottawa. They say there was no consultation and they will have to deal with the Merchant Law Group in Saskatchewan. Charlene Brown says a settlement of $25,000 breaks down to $3 a day for her broken childhood.
I think there is a shared connection because we were taken away. We have that sadness in our hearts that we have no family. We're in limbo, and now we're being insulted. I feel insulted, like offended that the government would offer this to us without consulting us.
One of Nunavut's most prolific pedophiles is continuing his appeal and now has a date in court. Eric Dieger was convicted in 2014 of 24 sex crimes against Inuit youth in Igloolik, Nunavut, where he was a priest in the late 1970s and early 1980s. He was later convicted of another 8 sex crimes against 4 youth in Edmonton in the 1970s. This week, the Nunavut Court of Justice set his appeal hearing for September 25th. Dieger is challenging testimony and evidence from 25 of the complainants. The 70-year-old has 10 years remaining on his 19-year sentence. Justice for Colton. That message has been shared for weeks across the country, and it's the title of tonight's all-new episode of APTN Investigates. We'll speak with the reporter after the break. But first, here's a look at a story we're working on.
Coming up Monday on APTN National News, it may just be the biggest hand games tournament in the history of the Northwest Territories. Over 500 people are participating in the Etowah Whalian tournament in Beshiko. 62 teams are entered, but only one will win the $100,000 purse.
Here's the rest of Saturday's weather forecast, picking back up in northern Alberta, +4 in High Level, Peace River and Fort McMurray, 3 above in Calgary and Medicine Hat, snow and +2 in Lethbridge. On the west coast, +10 in Victoria, Vancouver, Tofino, Campbell River and Bella Coola, +6 in Prince George, Port Nelson and Dease Lake. In Yukon, -7 in Old Crow, +9 in Mayo. Over to NWT, +7 under the sun in Fort Liard, 2 above in Trout Lake and Fort Simpson, -20 in Sax Harbor, 13 below in Paulatuck, -6 in snow in Tuktoyaktuk. Chilly day in Nunavut, -29 in Whale Cove and Chesterfield, -35 on Saturday in Tallyoak and Joe Haven. Welcome back. The killing of 22-year-old Cree youth Colton Bushy set off protests across the country. And just last month, the verdict of not guilty intensified that rage. Now, another blow for his family and the Indigenous community. No appeal. APTN Investigates reporter Rob Smith is here to talk about his episode, Justice for Colton, airing tonight. Rob, thanks for joining us. Can you tell us what it is about this case that sparked so much outrage?
Well, the reason we decided to do it was because of that outrage. It was a visceral reaction when the verdict came down, and rage is the proper term. There was across Canada mobilization right away, and that was definitely the feeling that First Nations man didn't get justice.
Who all do you speak to in this episode?
Well, I think mainly, most importantly, we talked with family and some of the and family friends. But Debbie Baptiste, the mother, was gracious enough to invite us into her home, and really we get to know who Colton was somewhat, a little bit. Can't really go into a man's complete life in one show, but we really do get a behind-the-scenes look at who this young man was.
Why, Rob, was it so important to do this story now?
We touched on it. It was that visceral reaction, that rage that came. There was, like I said, a feeling of a white settler getting away with something. That was the across-the-board feeling in Indian country. And we at APTN Investigates just thought, this is a story we have to do now. We have to capture that reaction and explain a little bit of how we got to that point.
Well, Rob, I know there's a lot of interest in this episode, and I look forward to seeing it myself tonight. Thanks for taking some time to join us.
Thanks, Dennis.
And that episode of APTN Investigates Justice for Colton will debut just minutes from now. That is your APTN National News for this Friday. For news anytime, visit our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Have a great weekend.